Yes, I just wanted to say thank you very much, Delisha and Jillian, for putting together this presentation to help our members in the application process.
And I just wanted to share with you that, tonight's session really does help us as a committee move towards the goals that our organization are trying to achieve. And in the spring issue of the Recorder, which looks like this, we had our equity, diversity, inclusion statement there. And the four goals that were outlined, one was around centering equity, diversity, and inclusion in all aspects of our organization, but really focusing on anti-racism, decolonization, and accessibility. And then building relationships is foundational to this work. And so this is a great opportunity for us to connect with you, to connect with our members, and to do this work. Create space to listen and learn from each other. And that's what tonight is about. And also to center transparency, sustainability, and accountability in all of our work. And we've really worked as a committee this year. As you know, the application is quite different. It's a new application, and it's very much tied to these goals. And so we're going to be exploring that tonight. So I'm going to pass it along to Delisha and Jillian.
And I'll pass it to Jillian.
And I'll catch that ball. Yeah, great to see those who have joined us tonight. And if you're watching the recorded version or just having this conversation in future, this is the work that we're going to continue together over time. And none of us are necessarily experts in anything except even, our own lived or living experience that we have. So each of us are bringing something to the table to talk about and to discuss and to learn together in service of our students. So just wanted to highlight a couple of pieces because, as Kevin mentioned, this is a brand new application process. And so some will maybe look familiar, and at the same time, we've got some pieces that you might notice as being quite new. First might be in the top part of the form, you'll notice that we are calling for presenters, but not necessarily for, a PowerPoint presentation. It could be though. It could be a discussion panel. It could be, an inquiry, an experiential learning opportunity. You could create space to have a community knowledge building circle. This could be a direct push of information, which sometimes is also required. You could just want to create a question and answer forum and bring some really interesting ways for people to build and share knowledge together. Could be a book talk or an interesting article. And we really want to open up the idea of how we can learn and how we can sustain our curiosity as professionals to learn together over time. So this year, the committee really is experimenting in a way with ways of doing things that may seem brand new, or maybe in your school setting you are already trying some things like this and you'd just love to share this kind of way of learning that has been inspiring you. And this is all in service of the OMEA's commitment to, and I'm just going to read this, it's highlighted there, to foster a diverse, equitable, inclusive, and accessible organization that is a representation of the diversity of Ontario music educators and music makers.
Thanks so much, Jillian. Yeah, and we want to introduce the Equitable and Inclusive Music Education Resource Selection Guideline, which we'll talk about those guidelines in a moment. But jumping off what Jillian said, we really want to emphasize that none of us here, the four of us that are kind of facilitating this evening, are experts. We're really just that, facilitators in this evening. And we want to start a conversation and come together and shared learning. And we're all on a learning journey towards a moving finish line. And so we really want to emphasize that, using these guidelines that we're going to talk about in a bit in that document, it's not a test. It's not about creating a smaller circle of people that are able to present or share knowledge and ideas at this conference. It's actually the exact opposite. It's to widen that circle. It's to think about the possibilities, the relationships, and grow from there. And so we really hope to just keep the invitations going, and hopefully this evening and the resource selection guideline will help facilitate that, which is what's introduced on the next slide. So you can find this guideline on the OMEA website. I think Kevin just put a link to it in the chat if you're in the live session this evening. And it's a new resource that centers equity, diversity, and inclusion. And it asks educators to consider their own identities, the identities of fellow educators and learners, and various positionalities in a learning environment, and to ensure that the creation of responsive and relevant music education environments. And so there are a couple of key questions that it asks, and it really it stemmed from the idea that it's not necessarily a single resource drawn out of context that is either oppressive or not oppressive, that checks the box or does not check the box. We wanted to move away kind of from that way of thinking and knowing and doing, and say, well, how does this resource fit into the learning environment that I am in? How is it in service of learners? And so it asks key questions that ask educators to notice what's going on in the learning environment, to name what's going on, and then to consider now how is a resource used. And so we'll dive more deeply into that next.
Just before we move on, Delisha, I know I'm kind of putting you on the spot, but I think that it's worth noting when you say resource, what you're imagining that to be in a classroom, because I think that certainly a resource could be some sheet music, and that it totally is. But I think we've also talked about expanding that notion of what a resource is, because I'm also thinking that we may have people watching this or listening to this who are not necessarily music educators in the classroom, but are in our music community and would somehow, through their work, be influencing the learning of students, as a community partner or as an industry representative. So I just wanted to push the boundaries or the notions of resource with you.
Yeah, absolutely. And like you mentioned, it could be that sheet music that we're talking about, and also, and we really want to emphasize this yes and notion throughout the presentation, but it can also look like the posters that are on the wall, the people involved in the conversation, and the videos that are being shown. All of these things are resources, and more, to be honest. Like, it is anything and everything that the learner and educator experiences and interacts with in that learning environment. And so we really want to kind of, push the bounds on that definition for sure.
Thanks, Delisha. And I think that's a really perfect moment to pause and say, so thinking about that, we have our OMEA on an Ontario, statement about what we're moving towards, what we're striving to become together collectively, and also that we're talking about anything and everything that students would interact with at one point in their learning. We're just going to have a pause slide, and we're just asking you to think privately. If you did have a question, you're welcome to, put it in the chat, but really we're not looking for an answer necessarily, but more just a time to reflect together on what do equity, diversity, and inclusion mean to you as a member of the music community. So just pausing to think about those terms, because we are going to be talking about them, using them, and we've already seen them in some of the work tonight. We'll just take a moment to pause.
So this slide is drawn from directly from that guiding document. And we just have a couple of definitions and a glossary. So equity, a condition or state of a fair, inclusive and respectful treatment of all people. Diversity, the presence of a wide range of human qualities and attributes within a group, organization, or society. And inclusive education, education that is based on the principles of acceptance and inclusion of all students. And this comes from the Ministry of Education's Culturally Responsive Pedagogy document, if anyone wants to check it out for more information as well.
So we're just going to take a moment and ask you to have a quick read and a quick think and a fill in the blank. All right. And if you'd like, we could do it, by contributing to the chat. That would be a great way to kind of build our thinking together. So I'll read the statement if you just mind having a quick pause, think, and a quick answer in the chat if you're able to connect in the chat. He is a great artist, but he's no... Number 2, listening to makes your baby smarter. Number 3, to be a great dancer, you must have a strong basis in Number 4, studying great theater begins with So Delisha, I'm not able to see the chat right now. Can you let me know what's being shared?
Absolutely. So we're getting some great answers from those that are joining us. So for the first one, lots of people said Mozart. He's a great artist, but he's no Mozart. Listening to classical music makes your baby smarter. To be a great dancer, you must have a strong basis in, some folks said, ballet or technique. Studying great theater begins with Shakespeare. And someone also commented that answers are examples of Eurocentric thinking.
Yeah, and it's true that a lot of those answers absolutely are based in a knowledge system that all of us have been socialized in, have been educated in, have been raised in, have replicated ourselves as educators. And it's nothing that we need to be ashamed of, or it's not a problem until it's the only knowledge system that we maintain and hold up as great art or something that is worthy, and others are, craft, or they're just campfire things, or that doesn't quite count as our particular dance form. It's street dance. So really what we're talking about through this resource, and what we're asking you to consider alongside of us as we go through the learning tonight is a critical think about who is in and who is out, or what is in and what is out. And these images, not surprisingly, would match fairly closely to the thinking that we've had. And this aligns with the philosophies, the ideologies, the knowledges that have been taught in the arts, and I'll specifically say in music, for hundreds of years. And we've sometimes ventured out into the worldwide view, but a lot of times world music becomes a unit, or it becomes a piece. Or sometimes we look at really investigating Black composers, or the origins of how we have actually appropriated a lot of Black music from Caribbean and from Africa, and we might do it only in February, in Black History Month. this is the reality that our system has maintained and used to uphold a very particular notion and understanding of what it means to be musical or what it means to be a musician. And so collectively, we're investigating, that has been good for some of us, but it certainly hasn't been good for everyone. And being in service of students, we think that we can do even better. And that's what we're going to talk about tonight. So appreciate that sharing that it is based in a Eurocentric view, right? So we just want to take that centricity of Europe and just widen our lens to think about a world view.
Thanks, Jillian. And absolutely, speaking about that worldview, and as we hope that you are applying to be a presenter, and as you are completing your application, we're not asking you to now throw out ideas or to feel like you cannot apply or feel fear in applying or anything like that. We actually hope that this is an invitation to come together and, like I said at the beginning, continue growing and continue learning together. And considering these questions and prompts as you are creating the presentation, the workshop, the Q&A forum, the knowledge circle, whatever it is that you are applying with, that you're considering these as you're creating that. And so the first part is, noticing, we don't know what we don't know. And so considering the identities of all those in the learning environment, and following that noticing, being able to actually name then who is in and who is out. And that's what we just did. In many ways, we definitely named the who's in piece in some circumstances, and also naming that who is out by extension. By creating an us, we're creating a them. And so just considering that and responding intentionally by creating learning opportunities that affirm learner identities. And like I mentioned closer to the beginning, it's not the resource, it's how we use it. And we want to analyze how this resource fits into the bigger picture of equitable and inclusive music and learning. So as Jillian mentioned, we can do one or two or many better than examining, learning about, performing the music of Black composers just during Black History Month. So considering these in a bigger context, there are some prompts for further conversation as well, because we know that these ways of knowing and doing and sharing knowledge and music education do not exist just within the silo of this conference. We hope that these conversations will continue onward outside of it as well. And so we will head to the next slide for another pause.
So this image is an image that's I'm not sure if it was kind of on a bottom banner. I don't speak website language very well, but it was on the OMEA page. And, this is a really great conversation to just kind of have, which is these are images that you might see in an instrumental band class, in an elementary music class, in a secondary music class. And again, it's not a bad thing. But when we know that we are in service of learners and families who come with cultural gifts and familial knowledges that can be from an entire world, would they see themselves reflected when they saw instruments like that or notation like that? Maybe, or maybe not. And we'll never know if we don't, get into that relationship with them and explore that. And in the same moment, if you don't have learners with backgrounds, cultural backgrounds, familial knowledges from around the world, we're also doing them a disservice because we live in a connected global world. And so we want, our students to be active citizens of our local communities, of our greater communities in Ontario and Canada, but even of the world. And so if we're not pushing the boundaries of what it means to be a musician or to be musical, we might be missing out on some opportunities. So just taking a pause to think about, if you could just, in your mind, walking the walls of some classrooms in your school or in the school you work in, or even if you're not in a school and your community partner, thinking about when you land on a website of a industry partner, or you're looking through a catalog, what do you notice? What have you noticed, and what are the images and the languages and the instruments telling us about who or what is in and who or what is out? And then who gets to decide? We'll just take a pause. So as you were taking that kind of visual image, walking the walls or walking the halls, the reminder is that everything that we present through a learning task or through a provocation or just in a lesson as a resource, or is anything that students interact with, can be considered a text. And we know that the purpose of text is to communicate meaning, is to present knowledge, is to create an opportunity for someone to engage with learning or ideas that they may not have known before. And so when we're considering designing the learning experiences for our colleagues at OMEA, consider that all of us are on a learning journey of some kind, and we know that as an organization, we're on a learning journey of equity, diversity, and inclusivity, and thinking about that in relation to our teaching and to learning that happens in classrooms. But that that the workshop that you share, how relevant and authentic can you make it to be sure that whomever is in the space, they're going to be able to take that learning back with them and create something in the classroom for students to be really inspired and engaged to learn more. So even though we're talking about enabling learners, as in maybe a student or a child learner, to see themselves in the learning of the classroom, you could take some of these considerations and think about that when you're designing the learning for the professional time that you will be contributing to next November. So these three considerations would ring true whether we're talking about students in a class, as in a child in a class, or adults in the space that you'll be contributing to at Synergy next November. Relevant and authentic designing of experiences, recognizing and responding to different ways of learning, and get creative with that, and making a better space for everyone through a mindset that says we are all on a journey and we all have something great to contribute. Part of this really is connecting directly to the curriculum, because overall expectation 2, or C2, is about critical analysis, and that's kind of what we're doing right now together.
So as Jillian shared at the beginning, the OMEA is committed to fostering a diverse, equitable, inclusive, and accessible organization that is a representation of the diversity of Ontario music educators and music makers. And so these three prompts kind of at the bottom are things to consider when you're creating or filling out your presentation application, or I call it a presentation, but in the same way we say resource in many different ways. I also want to expand the definition of what we're saying as a presentation across the board for this evening. And so please consider these as you are creating and applying. I hold an inclusive worldview of music and music practices. I scaffold and differentiate when planning for instruction and assessment to meet learners where they are. And I ensure my understanding is current and replace instructional practices and resources in the music which only contribute to one way of knowing or doing. And a version of this slide deck can be found on the OMEA website. The links were in the chat earlier. If you'd like to go through them again, as well as in the resource guideline itself. Yeah.
So Delisha, you mentioned earlier, and I just think it's a really great time to say it again. We are here till November, well, 2029. We're here, we're all in this for the long haul. This isn't a one and done, and we're excited to co-construct because we'll all be learning from each other. None of us are experts that won't be able to learn something new, and that's the exciting part, that we're really looking forward to all the really interesting ways that we'll be learning and the interesting things we'll be learning about. So if you have questions or you're not sure, this is quite possibly the beginning of many conversations that you might want to have. If you have one question, and it's an email question, one of the emails that we'll share, please reach out. You want to get together again and have a writing party, we could do that too. We're really here to support over the long haul, and I appreciate Delisha's commitment to that by saying that earlier, that this is really about creating, widening the circle over time.
Absolutely. So this beautiful quote that all instruction is culturally responsive. The question is, to which culture is it currently oriented? So these discussions that we're having, they are inseparable from the applications, from the presentations, from the knowledge we're sharing together. Nothing is neutral. Not ourselves, not our classrooms, instruction, assessment practices, the curriculum, none of it is neutral. And so being able to take that lens and constantly questioning as a part of that journey of ongoing learning is so important. And we're excited to be, starting that conversation today, to have it as a point of reflection in the workshops for Synergy, and as a part of conversations moving forward.
So thinking about what we're talking about so far, questions that might be coming up. What do you not know? What do you wish you knew? Are there things that might be missing for you that you need to kind of consider or think about? And then what or who can help you? It might be reaching out to someone that's here this evening. It might be reaching out to a colleague. These questions, we're going to ask you to just take a few moments and pause to think about, to kind of plan that next step for action, to think about how this might support as you go forward in your application for Synergy. Let's just take a moment. So the great news is we don't know what we don't know. It can also be a little bit scary to think about, wow, there's a lot of things that I don't know and I'm constantly learning, but that curiosity and that I don't know, it makes every day a great day to wake up and go, okay, I'm going to learn something new today. So these three questions, who am I, who are the learners, and who are we together, can be incredible ways to approach something, maybe like the application for Synergy, or maybe even thinking how this might apply in your classroom. That we know these considerations or reconsiderations of the great masters or the great artists. If that's the repertoire list we know, if that's the history that we know, that's great. But we also know that there's a world history and there are erased and omitted histories that were purposely erased and omitted in order to hold one group as the shining example and other groups as not. And so when we're looking for the gaps in our knowledge or the gaps in our understanding, sometimes these questions can be really helpful moving forward, because we have to understand, you know, what my identities and lived experiences and my knowledge when I walk into a classroom will affect how others feel about the learning that's going to happen. It will affect how I present things that are great or that are the histories that we must know. And so the only way that we're going to also move forward then is to really know our learners and know how their multiple intersecting social identities and how they interact with the world, how I can support next learning. So that, you know, kind of organically leads us to who are we together and that relationship that we have. So I don't have to be the expert in the room, and nor should I, because my knowledges have a limit. And the students in classrooms and our colleagues in OMEA, we have unbelievable knowledges that we can collectively examine, right? The smartest person in the room is the entire room. So we hope that we can continue by using this resource document that's set up in provocations of here's an idea to think about, here's some reflective questions to offer, and here's how that might apply to the classroom, that you might be able to take this same thinking when creating your application for synergy.
And as a common theme throughout this evening, it's not the resource, it's how we use it. And a big piece of that is embracing, celebrating that learners bring knowledge to every learning environment. And that opens up truly a world of possibilities to co-create and to also know that culture is a resource for learning. And one of the prompts says, I ensure all materials are accessible. So this is a way that a resource is used. And this can also be a consideration for any materials or the way that your workshop or presentation is set up. Is it accessible to the folks in the learning environment? Because that in itself is a learning environment. Centering students' lived experiences and realities. And in the same way, centering the experiences, the lived experiences and realities of the folks that will be in the learning environment. And I know it's hard to kind of guess who might be there at an event like this, but also I think a huge piece of that is expanding our worldview and bringing that into everything that we do, and partnering with students to choose performances from various diverse sources is another way that resources can be used in co-creation with learners. And so there are countless ways beyond what is on the slide of ways to collaborate, to ensure that we're considering these along the way, not as an afterthought. And we're excited to see how that carries through in synergy as well. And I think that brings us to the end of our kind of presentation part of the evening. And I'm going to hit, for the folks joining us on the recording, thank you for watching. And we look forward to seeing your applications. I'm going to hit pause on the record